So this is my first sketchbook tour, and the process of recording this video where I walk you through the pages of all the past year and a half that I've made this, that I've been working in this sketchbook has made me realize how deeply personal this is. So if you are watching this, I just want to invite you into a really special part of my life and where I document those little small moments, and just say, this is kind of sacred ground. So thanks for joining me here, and I just trust you to be honoring and respectful of these little caught in the moment, childish doodles, thoughts that I felt like were worth noting, moments in our family life. Anyway, sketchbooks become treasures and show a lot of who we are to the world. So just realizing that as I look through it and offer to share it with you. I hope you enjoy it. And I would love to have this be more of a conversation and hear from you if there are things that stick out, or if you have questions about things, comment or email me. Welcome into my sketchbook. I've loved this small sketchbook because it fits in my purse easily and it didn't feel too intimidating. It's a Talens art creation. I like the ecru pages. And I used the front pages to just keep track of some of the colors that I was using at the time, and the back as well, and then always a little bit of room to just get the ink going, doodle. Helps you loosen up and not be too perfect about it. I started this sketchbook in April of 2022, and here's a little bit of my favorite colors. Red clay. I'm in Georgia and grew up around this red dirt. Some moss with its tiny little seed pods, leaflets, I don't know the right name, opening up to the sky. A bit of playful coloring of a mountain view. And I love when the spring leaves are all different shades of green. And here's another red dirt road going through the countryside in Alabama. This was getting so dark we could barely see anymore. We were deep in the woods following this little path looking for these magical shooting star flowers. They only grow in a few places in Alabama where we spend time, and we are rarely there at the right season. And it was right at the end of the season, so only a few of the flowers still had petals, but it was so magical. And this is my grandmother's house. So we're a season of moving out of my grandparents' house. This, I really have enjoyed being able to turn these sketchbooks to the side and get a nice long view. The tulips. This was a hilarious day that I probably wouldn't have ever put into a sketchbook, but I had been doing a sketch a day challenge, and so I chose this moment. These are my feet. It might be hard to tell. Kitchen table chairs and our kitchen leg of the table, kitchen chair, kitchen table. My kids said, I think the cats brought an animal into the library. And I was like, seriously, you think it's in the house alive? And next thing I knew, here comes a chipmunk dashing through our kitchen right under my feet. That was hilarious. And I just love having that moment documented to remember. These are butterfly iris, strawberry begonia, fiddle fern heads, and snowdrops that grow all alongside my driveway in the spring. Some of my favorite combinations of plants. And here's a wild tulip, really ruffly and beautiful, and kind of got some mixed media, a little bit of paint, a little bit of Neocolor crayons, and just layering and playing. This is my pottery wheel and the old pot that's kind of slumpy and unglazed that I keep all my pottery tools. And this is a chair that my grandfather sat in his kitchen every morning. And I love having that chair in my studio and remembering him. And this is my other grandfather's tool shop. It's covered with fig vine, and he kept his tools meticulously organized here at the edge of the woods at my grandparents' house. And while I was on a visit, I just dashed this out really quick, and it's such a treasure. This is a sketch of a painting by a friend, and it makes me think of how in our homes we are making creativity and building lives that just pour out and bring light and beauty into the world in ways beyond what we can imagine. This is a sketch from our Atlanta Botanical Gardens. We have little frog exhibits and orchids, and when I see this, I remember the day that my friends Tessa from Netherlands and Vanessa from Australia were here for a visit for a creative retreat, and it was so great to be there with them. And this is my daughter's pre-K graduation, and because I was doing that Sketch a Day challenge, I just pulled my sketchbook out during the ceremony. And yes, I've got a lot of pictures of that day, but there's something about hand drawing something that captures it in a different way. This is a trip to New York, and the pigeons on the playground that my niece and nephew spend time on, and I loved it. My nephew said, "Oh, you did our playground pigeons." It's kind of the closest thing he's got to a pet in the city, so he asked me to do another drawing. So this wound up being a sketch for a bigger painting that I left him in New York. And this was allium and some other plants I don't know the names of, but this was the garden at the Met Cloisters, sitting on that path. It just takes me right back to that moment, sitting on the stone path, surrounded in that beautiful kind of medieval architecture. And this was waiting for dinner to arrive with my niece and nephew. It's my nephew and his little fox stuffed animal. And it's not like it looks exactly like them, but it captures something of them, and it reminds me of that moment and time spent together. This was along the way. I love how the watercolor does this kind of blooms and granulation. Sometimes you've got to get enough water on the page to have that kind of paint magic happen. And then I use the Neocolor crayons for the line drawings here. This was just a stop along the way on our road trip from New York to Boston, and this was a swan. It's hard to see the swan, but this was rowing out on a lake, and just seeing that swan was so magical. This was up on that coastline and Inkwell Beach in Oak Bluff, and it's seaweed and these shells that are different than the ones we have in Georgia, and I loved getting the kind of orangey terracotta colors, the purpley colors. I sat here and had an iced coffee while my daughter played in the waves, and it was just, yeah, I just love that. I don't know what I'll do with these textures and colors one day, but I think I'll come back to them. Little shorebird. And some of these things in here are kind of personal messages and metaphors that I want to remember. This is a tree and some waterfalls in a place in the woods that I walk regularly. And this was waiting on a child's appointment, and in the waiting room there were some of these plants with their roots growing. I love visually exposed roots, just getting to see what's happening underneath and supporting the plant. Makes me think a lot about the things that root us in our lives and support growth, but we don't think about it. It's kind of underground. It's at the Great Smoky Mountains. You'll see just this, I love letting my hand just trace that curvy line at the edges of clouds. I just love that type of line. Just makes me feel happy to trace. And these were gladiolas. Another opportunity to turn that sketchbook on the side and make it tall. Use some of the Neocolor crayons, and then came back in with watercolor. And this is another sideways drawing with a big tree, lots of little green stuff in the forest, and then there were mountain laurel, which was just, oh, love seeing those bloom. More ripply water. That's another shape that I love in nature, to just sit and trace the shapes that I see in water, the lines on the surface of the water. And this is my niece on the other side of the family. We all worked on building this stone stack, and the Neocolor crayon, the yellow one had a little green, so it's not perfect drawing, but I just love having that moment captured in time and seeing her presence with me in my sketchbook. That's a goldfinch flying out. This was a magical sunrise morning. My husband woke me up at 5 a.m. and I'm not a morning person, and I usually would have said, you go have fun without me, but I said yes. I just felt like it was important. And we drove up into the Smoky Mountains and hiked up at a dash to get to the top of Balsam Bald to see the sunrise. And you can see this gray is all the it's all the smoky, foggy mist that's between the mountains. You can see the mountain peaks coming up as if they're islands, and you could see the clouds kind of flowing like they were water as they retreated in the sunlight. It was such a beautiful morning. I don't feel like this captures, especially this sky doesn't capture the light streaming through as the sun rose, but it certainly takes me back and reminds me of that moment. Even a bad drawing can remind you of a good time. This is a big rock. I was so proud of myself because I was saying yes to playfulness and adventure intentionally, and I jumped off this really high rock, and then I sat and drew as everybody else took turns, and the splashes, all the shapes of the water as people make huge splashes. And here are my girls. Used one of those rainbow lead pencils. I love being able to twist those and turn those and get different colors. It makes drawings kind of a surprising, fun finish. I saw an indigo bunting in the woods, and while it was certainly too fast for me to draw in any kind of detail, I looked it up later. Just, it's so wild. It's hard to believe that they just live out there in the woods, these wildly turquoise, iridescent, glorious things. At the end of summer, the woods around here are always full of these golden orb spiders. And that same trip to Alabama in the woods, I saw a beautiful Luna moth. And it was, oh my goodness, just, I've always loved them. I've always loved that shade of green. That was a day when I was walking in the woods and I saw a snake, copperhead snake, right in my path. And it spooked me, but it also encouraged me to know that I saw it. I always keep my eyes on the path, and I saw it in time, and it wasn't a danger after all. This is a tree that I see on my walks with the carved messages and its root system once again. I find that just a common theme that I love to draw and think about, just the complex root systems that are supporting our growth. This was a day that I made flower crowns, and a friend was fun enough to wear it with me. This was a trip to the beach, and there was this one heron who had kind of been trained, I guess, all summer to stay close to the fishermen in hopes of getting some fish. And so I could get so close, and I just watched, for hours over that weekend-long trip with my husband. He had a meeting, and I drew this heron. This is just gel pens, sparkly gel pens that I had in my purse when I started out. And then I came back with a handful of colored pencils, and this is just one of my favorite drawings ever. Something about the kind of mess of it, getting that ruffled feathers and just a touch of color, but left unfinished and sketchy. And they move, so you just have to capture whatever parts you can. And this was another sunrise over the ocean. And this is a white heron that I see in the lake behind my house, out in the woods where I go for walks. And it was so neat to see it reflected in the water, and you can't quite tell which is up and which is down, which I think is fun. This was a trip to the Art Museum in Auburn, Alabama. Just did a copy sketch of a Tanner's, he did a study for Mary. It's always a great skill building, and I don't know, just a way to really kind of echo an artist's work. As they've worked out the composition, you can just learn by copying it. It's been a very long-standing way of growing in your art skill. This was a sculpture they had out in the garden. And here's my son. Kind of just didn't want to get caught up trying to get the right tones and shades of skin color, so I just said, all right, we're doing a fauve version, which is an art movement where they used colors that did not coordinate with the natural version. This is a sketch for a future project. This was a moment in the fall. I spent a lot of time in the woods and let myself just kind of be playful with fall leaves, trying to just stay connected to that childlike part of myself. It's so important to stay there in order to not take ourselves too seriously and have freedom in our creativity. So there's my fall leaf crown. And this was Christmas. Advent calendar at church and the backs of people's heads. It's interesting how well we know the backs of people's heads in places where we all sit facing the same direction, like church. This was a really special first drawing of the inside of the birdhouse. I worked so hard for the past few years choosing decorations and gathering furniture from estate sales and Facebook Marketplace. I painted this lamp. It had been spray painted and was getting chipped, so I repainted it with a chinoiserie kind of bird scene on it. Recovered this old sofa with a kind of imaginative fabric, and then it was fun to sit down and do a sketch of it. It just takes me right into that place that's special. And I have always loved drawings of interiors. There's this special intimacy about the places inside homes where we spend time. And it speaks a lot. The way the space is speaks a lot to the people that spend time there. It says a lot about them. And so I've always loved doing interiors, and I hope to one day do some more paintings and drawings of interior spaces. These are some future project inspirations. This was a fire. In the winter, we do preventative fires on the land that we have. It cleans up the woods and keeps it from being vulnerable to fires that would do a lot of damage. These are controlled with boundaries and monitored and done in the right weather and all of that. So it's not a danger, but it is really beautiful and powerful to see the light streaming through the smoky haze and that fire just chasing across the floor of the forest. This was a study I did for the mural I'm painting at the birdhouse in Alabama. All around the dining room, I'm painting the landscape and filling it in with the local birds. And so this is a snag, which is the word for a dead tree that's standing. A lot of times people think they're an eyesore and want to pull them down, but they're so important. They're really important habitats for animals and insects. So I loved getting a chance to study those and draw those. I'm generous with my sketchbook at times and let children use them when they need to. These are a few items in my home that felt like I wanted to remember them and just sketch them and think about what they mean to me. And this was a time just remembering the songs that I heard in my home growing up. My mother singing Holy, 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 the old hymn in the morning while she was in the kitchen, and singing the Lord's Prayer over me in my bed at night. So just drawings from memories, wanting to capture those moments in time. A little acorn top tea party in the woods. And this is a little sketch done the last day of our vacation in Mexico. It was this beautiful stringed ceiling. That blue ocean is just incredible. I used some Inktense pencils, a few Neocolor crayons, and then watercolor to kind of fill in and activate those themes. And that was a bougainvillea flower petal from the trip that I just taped into the sketchbook. And this is a yellow velvet chair that my mother had in her home all the time growing up, and I've always loved it. And our yellow cat thinks it's his throne and that he should take naps in it all the time. It's another one of those interiors. My daughter, this is a drawing she directed me on, chose the colors to use. And this is in the spring of this year, these heart-shaped leaves of the redbud tree. It's right around Valentine's Day, so it just really struck me how wild it is to have a tree with hearts hanging from it. Sometimes we get so used to things in nature that we take them for granted and we don't notice how wild it is. I love drawing musicians when they are performing. The facial expressions, just the spirit that's pouring out in that moment. They're moving constantly, so it's a challenge. This is just letting myself do blind contour where I didn't even bother looking at my page, and really loose as they're moving. But these are some of the lyrics to the songs that they sing. Mackenzie Lockhart, Andy Gullahorn, and Taylor Leonard. It was a beautiful night of live music. And you have all the permission in the world to look closely at these people, so it's a great opportunity to do a drawing. Be fearlessly authentic. Thank you, Dove. Dark chocolate. I will. This was at the beach, the marsh. If you followed along here, you know that I just so love the marsh. And there's the white heron, a crane, egret, I guess is what you call the white herons, in the dock. This has got some colored pencil, a little bit of marker, a little bit of watercolor, a felt tip pen that I dug out of my purse, just kind of grab what's to hand. And I really loved this one, letting it just stay as a sketch and unfinished, but capturing some of the patterns, the shapes of those lines. These are sermon notes, something really profound, and I had my sketchbook in the purse, so there it goes. This is the pond while they were fishing, and the little circles in the water as they cast in the lure. The fishing lures kept landing in this tree, which I think is going to inspire a little story in my mind. This was a day at the beach, and it's just slightly alluded to, but we were noticing all these textures and lines and shapes in the sand, little dots, and wondering what they were. Were they eggs? Were they poop of some creature? What might it be on this long walk? And then watching my two youngest chase after a huge flock of seagulls. So just capturing a moment of time imperfectly, but that's what life is, right? All these moments add up. This is again at Sapelo Island, one of our favorite wild places. There were dolphins just dancing out in the sunset, and we were riding in an old pickup. We did not ride on top of the car, but we did pose for a picture, and that's what I did this drawing from, just from a picture, and the memory of the colors. Sometimes we can get color more accurately in life than from photos. This is 4th of July at our neighborhood pool. I used Neocolor crayons, and then I came back later another day and activated some of it with water to get that to fill in more. It was a cannonball contest. That's what's going on right here. The diving board and all the splashes. I like using Neocolor crayons, especially for figures at a distance, because they're not very detailed. You know, a crayon, you just can't get that sharp tip and get lost in details. It keeps you loose and just getting the basic shapes, which our minds can fill in and know that they're humans. This was a water brush pen. You know, you can get these brushes where you can put water in them, and they're great for watercoloring on the go. But I've also been experimenting with putting pen ink, such as this Noodler's ink. Can put pen ink, maybe like half and half water, half ink, and then you can paint with the ink. Just pull it out real quick. So that's what this is. These were photos of birds, doing a study as I prepared to glaze some pots that I knew I wanted to get bird shapes onto. Here's a quote from a book I was reading, The Creative Act, A Way of Being by Rick Rubin. Great art opens a conversation rather than closing it, and often this conversation is started by accident. It's good for artists to remember we don't have to answer all the questions, and we don't even have to know exactly what we want the viewer to think. We have to know that it's something made by a deep feeling of something that matters to us, that's something that feels important, but it's okay to not have all of it verbalized yet. This is a sketch of a pot that I did a few years ago, actually probably 10 years ago. It's terracotta green man pot. And here's a picture of my husband on our screen porch on a summer night. Just the posture that he has, even though his face is not in detail, the posture that he has kind of reminds me of him. It lets me know it captures a bit of him. We have to trust that even if things are not fully detailed, we can capture enough of somebody. And these were the lines on my screen porch and some plants on the edge of a visitor. Might come in and fill that in one day, I don't know. And this is the last drawing of mine because that's one of my daughters. And these are just notes on colored pencils as I tried to decide on some new purchases. But this drawing, capturing July 15th, and on the way to the beach, stopping through my hometown, the kids had found a cicada. It was no longer alive, but I was amazed at how that green was so similar to this green ink that I'd gotten recently. And I just filled the design of the wing shapes in with my imagination. You know, they have kind of an iridescent feel to them, so just broke that out, pixelated it kind of. Outside of my hometown, there's Dickie's Peaches, and there were peaches out the wazoo. Peaches everywhere, and I cannot stop loving the shades of pinky, peachy, orangey corals with turquoises and greens. So putting that all together was a no-brainer, and reminds me of that summer trip through my hometown, stopping to visit my mom, the kids eating peach ice cream on the way to the beach. It captures the summer. So that is my sketchbook tour. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope it inspires you to just put your phone away sometimes, stop the scrolling and the zone out, and capture a moment imperfectly and trust that you might see more to that moment of being fully present to your life than you realize at the time.